interacting with some earlier stage founders, I either see or hear about some common mistakes. And, a lot of it has to do with basically making something too soon without doing proper research or not having a strategy in place, and then, launching or starting the company and then thinking they can find everybody who is going to need their product. So I'm curious basically about your approach to picking marketing channels and your thoughts around that.
Absolutely. So I think that we should let the market dictate how they like to buy. And if you don't know, you can ask them. The last X product you bought, how did you hear about it? What research did you do? What did that process look like? Which websites do you spend the most time on? Which publications do you read? These are all things that people will tell us. But even most importantly, I think that the way we approach marketing, the aspects of marketing, most companies give an exact inverse amount of attention to the activity that will drive results. So we tend to think of acquisition and then retention and then monetization. The exact opposite is what drives the long-term revenue and viability of a company. So a lot of emphasis is placed on acquisition, but if we're targeting people who can't or won't see the value of the product as it currently stands, we'll never retain them. So not only have we not paid back what it took to acquire them, but we also potentially have a negative impact on our brand equity in the market. And Brian Balfour, who I just mentioned, says this a lot, that we launch products. He says that most product launches actually hurt growth because we launch products to everyone, and then people come in, we expect they'll say, oh, you know what, this product isn't for me, and leave, but they don't. What they say is, it doesn't work, don't use it. And so instead of targeting a very specific subset with a product that delivers the value they want and positioning to what they care about, we've launched a mediocre product to everyone so people don't stick around. And even more importantly than that, we haven't thought of how to monetize it. So the way we monetize it should be the perceived value is greater than the friction plus the price. Simple. But we also want to package it in a way that we ask people to pay when they see value. So maybe that's a subscription, maybe it's a transaction, maybe it's an upfront purchase. But we should never just assume there's always a right way to sell or package a product. And we need to value it around the perceived value of the market. And so how we package that, again, will be based on the target segment. And it's also possible that the free users and the word of mouth, a lot of models will calculate that lifetime value is 0, but if they're referring other customers, they're part of your viral loop, it's not. So how we think of monetizing, the price point we set impacts the perceived value, impacts how much we can reinvest in R&D. It'll be really foundational for a long-term growth strategy, but it's often guessed at. If I had $1 for every time I heard a founder say, so what do you think of this as a price point? I could probably pay back all the money they left on the table, right? And so price is often guessed at, and it's hard to change, but it is way more foundational in the overall growth and the revenue of a company than either retention or acquisition, which tend to get the inverse attention in that order. The retention of our customers is the underlying business health metric. It's the most important thing. And if it's not high, we might as well have not acquired the customer, because not only have we not paid back what it costs to acquire and service them, we have a negative impression from them. So whether a customer never buys or churns in a year, the marginal impact on revenue is really comparable. We can't sustain a business where most people don't want to stick around and buy again. But we still see companies focusing the majority of the efforts on acquisition. And a lot of the go-to-market strategy consulting help that people come to us for is really a lack of product market fit, and they don't realize it. And they don't really care sometimes. They just want to distribute. They want results. They want to launch campaigns and see numbers go up and feel good about it. But they're worse off than if they had never done any of that, because not only have they paid money and resources that could have gone into the development of a product people wanted, but now there's a negative perception of the product in the market. That's not to say to sit and I want to caveat that all your listeners should know their weakness. So if there are people who tend to rush impulsively and launch, this advice is for them. If there are people who tend to iterate for years and never launch. And that's, again, the framework of the lean startup. We need the market's feedback. We want to know what they're doing with the product, but the actual value has to be delivered and seen, because people will gladly tell us if they wish a product did something it doesn't. They won't tell us if they stop using a product because it isn't valuable. The core value has to be there. And so the focus on retention of the customers who will see the value should be the focus after we've decided how to monetize it in a way that they'll see value from. And then we can focus on the acquisition from the positioning, the channels that they go to and they see. Word of mouth will always be the most effective channel. And we want to make sure that we've positioned our product and set it up and designed it in a way that the word of mouth is positive. We won't be able to track all of it. And we can't scale a business with only acquiring customers that we personally touch. So we have to make sure that the retention is really focused and buttoned up. People who see the value know it exists and it's packaged in a way they care about. And we've monetized it in a way that is aligned with the perceived value. But just focusing on having a presence on every social media platform that exists, spraying everything, right? Pareto Principle. 80% of the results come from 20% of the activities. Figure out where to prioritize based on the channels that the market likes. And if you don't know, they will tell you, and go from there. I also see testing and experimenting thrown out as a substitute for strategy. So a test and experiment is clearly defined. It has control variables. It has clear hypotheses that we're rejecting or accepting. That doesn't mean throw $1,000 into Facebook ads and see what happens. That's not an experiment. That is an expensive distraction, right? And so a hypothesis, anything we're thinking of doing, anything we're putting metrics around should have a hypothesis and a strategy first and data to support it, not the other way around. Data should never set a strategy or make decisions for us because we'll draw conclusions that aren't supported by the data. And the real point of data is to help us figure out what to do more of, but it can never tell us why people are behaving a certain way. It can only tell us what they're doing. So we need some qualitative insights about why they're motivated by certain things, what they prioritize, what's driving their behavior. So when we see data, we have very clear hypotheses that we can test, and we can say this creative, this offer, this call to action did or didn't work, not this channel is or isn't effective. And the example I give is a reverse blueprint model. The first part of this will sound similar. We would never build a house without having a blueprint, right? You wouldn't say, oh, let me just lay the foundation and huck a few bricks over here and that'll be a fireplace. We'd have a blueprint. We'd know exactly where everything is going. But the exact inverse is exactly true when we're evaluating how a strategy worked, because we would never say indoor plumbing is just not going to work in this building. But people often say email marketing doesn't work for us. Facebook marketing doesn't work for us. We need to do more events, because they've evaluated the strategy before the tactics. So when we're looking at how effective a campaign was, we want to look at the tactics first. How was the list segmented? What was the call to action? What was the subject line? When was it sent? What was the offer, etc.? We would never say email marketing doesn't work until we've looked at all of those things and perfected them. That's the reverse blueprint. We'd never say indoor plumbing doesn't work until we looked at how it was put together. So that is exactly how we want to approach our go-to-market strategy and our understanding of it, with a strategy and hypotheses in place to test, not just spraying and praying, and not just thinking we need to go everywhere. We want to go where the market is and prioritize those 20% of activities that are deriving 80% of results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. I feel like in that answer, I've learned just, kind of clarifies and a few the analogies you made and a few of the points are just very, very interesting for me to try to respond to. I guess I'll see if I can boil it down. So one thing is that, you don't want to just begin with a test. Like you said, Facebook ads, $1,000 is just an expensive distraction. But then at the same time, you want to have a reason for doing, let's say, Facebook ads to begin with. And then if it doesn't work, again, sticking with that example, you don't necessarily throw out Facebook ads as a channel. Let's say, was our targeting, was our ad copy, was the offer, was all that correct before we... And
at first, we would want to run Facebook ads because our audience is on Facebook. And then we would want to come out with positioning and creative that we know appeals to them because they've told us. Mm-hmm. That's how we can draw conclusions from those experiments. But if we don't have any one of those factors, we don't know what's really driving the outcomes we're seeing. Mm-hmm.
So as I feel like I'm learning a lot in this first 30 minutes here, I have an idea. You can just say you don't want to do this if you want, but I have an idea for something I've been thinking about as during remote learning. I wish this existed. So let's say I came to you and said, mm-hmm. Here's my idea. Can you give me a few questions that we might use to evaluate how to move forward with it? I'll give a little more context. So let's say one thing that has happened throughout remote learning is that one thing that was lost for me as a teacher was a lot of the partner interactions or group work. And while there's things like Google Meet and Zoom that are good for either a whole class, and I know there's breakout rooms and things like that, it's to me not optimized for best mimicking the collaboration that might help happen in a classroom, even in terms of throwing in asynchronous opportunities too. So let's say I had a solution that I thought would help high school teachers better do collaboration, even in a remote learning environment. Can you think of like what, and I said, I hired you basically,
Right.
what would be, and I had a prototype perhaps, or maybe, ready to share, what might be some of the first questions or first things you would ask me or tell me to go from there?
It's a great point. So we would want to do market research, and the importance here is making sure we're doing true market research and not product research. And the difference is that by the time we say, hi, I'm Gerard, I have this idea for this product that does this, what do you think about it? That's product research. Market research is really what are their priorities and pain points that the other teachers have, because it's possible that a pattern will emerge from those. You'll talk to other high school teachers about their day, their challenges, what they're experiencing, the last conversation they had with a parent, what it was about, the last conversation they had with another teacher, what they talked about, the most common conversation they had with their principal. And it's possible that they will say something that is totally solved by your product, but it isn't around remote learning collaboration. It's some other description that meets that problem. So now we can, and then we can get into the specifics after we've asked them generally about their days and their priorities. Then we would say, thanks so much. Here's the product I'm thinking about. I'd love your thoughts on it. But we haven't biased the initial response of what they actually care about, because again, there's no shortage of accurate ways to describe your product. And maybe we lead with whatever their most common pain point is, and then get into the feature description as we've envisioned it. But if we start with the feature description as we've envisioned it, everything we hear is coming from it. And that's where we get really mediocre positioning, where things are kind of fine and they resonate because we asked people if they cared and they said yes. But they're focusing on the problem we put in front of them. We're not capturing their top high-level problem. And this is where we get kind of stalled sales cycles, is something is fine and teachers will like it, but they don't have to have it. But it's possible. What they absolutely have to have, the biggest pain point with their principals, their biggest headache with their students, is also solved by this. And if we were to capture that and position it, now we can do that. So I start with true market research, and usually that starts with, this is your hypothesis, that this problem to this solution will impact this group of people. So we go talk to that group of people, and we want to develop a psychographic profile of them, because it's possible that certain high school teachers, even at the same school, of the same age, the same background, will be great initial users, and some won't. We want to figure out what goes into that, and that's what starts with the true market research, as opposed to the product research. So the conversation with these teachers would be something like, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I would really love to understand, you're the target demographic for a product that we're developing. I would really love to understand your authentic thoughts and experiences. No right or wrong answer. If you hate something, I want to know that too. And then tell you about the product as we envision it. Are you okay with that? And we'd say something about how the data would be used, how to be confidential, et cetera, but we wouldn't start off with biasing them around the company name and the product, et cetera, because they already have an existing association with your company name if you've been out in the market, and so you're changing how they think of what to tell you, because they want to be helpful and they're very kind and they've given us their time. So if they think of you as a company that does X, they're filtering what they say through that lens. But if they really think you want to know that they drive to school and they drop their son off, et cetera, all of that tells us they might be listening to the radio at this time. They might be on a phone call at this time. All of these are hypotheses we test about the channels that are effective. And if we start with the product, we've lost all of that. And we've also lost the potential better positioning. And we want to capture all of that in their exact words. Sometimes we summarize in shorthand in our words, and we've missed what we think is a synonym if the market doesn't. And I'll give you an example. Accurate and reliable were words that these founders I was working with thought were synonymous. But it turned out that the market really cared that things were accurate. And reliable was seen as kind of a longevity thing, that they thought the product would be around for a while. They didn't care as much about that. So saying that it was accurate was really important. Saying that it was reliable was not. But if we had just gone out with what we said, we would have said it was reliable, and the market wouldn't have cared. So we want to capture their exact words and their exact problems, things that they will think are relevant. Tell us which sites they're on, when they're communicating, when they're most likely to open an email. These are all things that they won't think to tell us if you start with your problem of remote learning. And it's possible that the problems they have and the pain points they have as they walk you through their day are exactly what you care about, which is fantastic and it's validating. But and then if we go into product research and we say, tell me about the last time you bought X, what prompted that decision, that's a proxy into what's changed in their life. But again, market research and product research aren't interchangeable, and neither is buyer or customer research and user research. Sometimes when we're selling education products, the buyer is a different person than the end user, often. And by the time somebody has become a customer, their solution to solving a problem is different than your buyer's. And so we don't want to lose the aspects of the priorities that people have. If we're just talking to users and calling them customers, are not interchangeable. The journey is different, the pain points are different, the conversation is often different. And so we want to just maintain the mindset of the people we're trying to sell to as much as possible.